reasonableness, RIFs, and retaliation. The three big R's in human resources. So really, when you start looking at it, RIF is reduction in force. So let's look at some of the different aspects of it. There's another aspect that for disparate impact is the employer can say there's reasonable factors other than age. When you're talking about this type of law, that is part of the overall discussion and the dialogue and the jargon that we have. So it include any requirement that doesn't have an adverse impact on older workers. Okay, so there's a factor over here. If you recall, I mentioned earlier that there's to some extent a fog around the actual issue of age discrimination. So the fog that they have out there is called reasonable factors other than age. So a lower standard than business necessary. It's in effect the narrow viability of it. So one of the cases here is Smith versus the city of Jackson. They had a change in the aspect of a group of police officers. They had received a raise, except for the fact that the raise was smaller for more senior officers than younger officers. So they sued the city of Jackson saying, you did this to us, so you have that issue. So they sued, and the court did say, you have the aspect of disparate impact that is there, except for the fact that you didn't meet the threshold of what that was. So Smith overall lost the case, but they did add something to the body of employment law in that with a age discrimination complaint, you can have a disparate impact very similar to what we see in Title VII. In this case, sometimes it's a matter of you may want to sit down there, because I've actually done exactly what happened over here. I chopped off the bottom salary schedule of the first 5 steps. Well, did that have a disparate impact? Did I give the incoming people more money than they had before? Yes. Did I change the salary structure? Yes. That can happen. But in my case, it was a union contract, and so I had a union agreement. In this case, that apparently was not the level. So pay attention to the aspect of reasonable factors other than age. Even if you're doing something for a good cause, it doesn't mean that somebody can find a reason to sit there and throw stones at it, or in this case, throw a lawsuit on top of it as well. A reduction in the workforce is based sometimes on salary amounts that have the greatest impact. It could be that the employer says, well, I'm going to do an RFOA because of the fact that, by golly, I'm paying these older people too much money. I'm going to get rid of all of them. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. Okay, so they may sit down there and lay off the highest paid employees and hoping to get by on people with less experience and less salary. That can happen, except for the fact that you need to pay attention to what exactly does it mean. I'm laid off because of the fact I've been here too long. So there's some social aspects of it. Really, you're going to do that to somebody who's been loyal to your company and do that to them. So by the time you're done, pay attention to all the different aspects of what a layoff really means. If a layoff is based upon some type of measurement, okay, are you doing performance appraisals? That should be part of the regular routine, especially if you go into an RIF. It's a big deal. The EO looks at 5 considerations total of reasonableness for an RFOA. The factors related to your employer's stated business purpose. What exactly is it? Okay, is it well defined and is applied fairly and accurately? Is it limited to the supervisor's subjective discretion as to what that's going to be to lay somebody off? Is the employee assessed the effective employment practice on older workers? Was there a measurement on that? Let's see. If you're laying off 41 people, okay, and 40 of them are older, do you have a problem? Okay, so pay attention to that. The degree of harm to individuals within a protected age group, so it depends what it all is. We had a case like this with Meacham versus the Knowles Atomic Power Lab. In this case, indeed, they had a RIF, a reduction in force, and normally the standard of defense for an RFOA is that business necessity, we needed to save money. Well, indeed, they laid off 41 people, and 40 of them were the age of 40 and above. It doesn't take a rocket science to figure out that, geez, this sure looks like somebody sat down and they're picking on older workers, and by golly, the courts agreed with it and they lost the case. So with that, just because you make more money, just because you're older, doesn't mean the company can sit down and pick on you, which certainly has the appearance over here for Knowles Atomic Power Lab. So, and that standard, I don't think anybody did maybe their due diligence because this was actually low-hanging fruit to sit down and win in a court case. So pay attention to what's going on. Don't be the people that end up in some type of PowerPoint slide later on 5 years from now because of the fact somebody didn't take the time out to go look and evaluate what the impact was. In the event of a RIF, age discrimination can be proved by the employer that they refuse to allow discharged employee to bump others with less seniority. That's always something of an issue, and because that's pretty standard even if you don't have a union. Hire younger workers when their jobs become available instead of the employee that was discharged. Those are two things that are really red flags that growing up. If you have that happening in your organization, get ready for some aspects of legal recourse from the employees that you laid off. A Discrimination Act excludes bona fide retirement plans, though, so keep that in mind based on age, that are not subterfuge to be the purpose of the act. If it's voluntary, if you sat down, if you left this place, I'm going to give you 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, a year's salary. If you leave voluntarily, life is good, because that's a pretty common practice you'll have in employment. People are voluntarily leaving, they sit down, they accept a buyout package, they get to leave whatever, or they get a lump sum when they leave. So you have that. So it's a bona fide retirement package. Always sit down there and pay attention to that. Lotus versus Corbis Holdings. Sometimes in this case, you'll find this in your text. Okay, there's interference with the age by the time you're done on the Lotus versus Corbis Holdings because of the fact that an actor both hires and fires a worker protected by the ADEA. So pay attention to that. Read the case study that we have. Retaliation about all areas of age discrimination. Retaliation is probably the largest thing if you are the employee that you have, and if you're the employer, pay attention because this is a lot of times the weakness. 55.8% of all claims received by the EEOC are based upon retaliation. So when you see that the age discrimination complaints themselves may be dropping, but when you have a continual level of over half the complaints are all related to retaliation, it's very certain that you can sit down and look at the aspect of there's so many of them, how many really focus in on the aspect of age. So a lot of times people will sue for punitive damage and then money over compensatory damages. So you'll see that aspect as to where it is. Keep in mind where we talked about what's the difference between compensatory and punitive damages. Compensatory is back salary and wages. Punitive is to punish somebody over and above what the actual cost was they would have paid originally. So pay attention about the pretext. Look as to what is the employment's action that you're dealing with. Look in the aspect of, is there a hostile environment for people in age if the employer affected, if they're 40 years of age or older? Did the employer consider that? Is the employee was harassed through words or action based on age? If somebody comes in, and a lot of times, my experience on this is you'll have somebody coming in as a chief executive officer, and they want to come in and they want to make a big imprint on the organization. And they'll say lots of bombastic things, trying to show the whole world that they're focused, that they're on course, and so on. If they start saying, we need to have younger workers, as soon as those words are uttered, you can't take them back. And all of a sudden, as soon as they're uttered, you will have some people say, oh, especially all the older workers. And you won't have maybe the 40-year-olds, but you sure will have the 50 and 60-year-olds paying attention to that, because if they're affected by that, if that CEO goes after them based upon their salary, they'll always focus in on the age or retaliation in the process if they're looking to sit down there and fabricate a reason to terminate your older employees. Harassment unreasonably interferes with the employee's work performance, can create an objectively intimidating, hostile work environment. Always pay attention to what's going on. Reasonableness, RIFs, retaliation, the spirit impact we know already applies to ADA. Okay, the reasonable factors other than age, it's only limited because of the fact that if you really sit down and discriminating and somebody sues, you'll have a problem. It's not always about age. Keep in mind you have this fog that seems to envelope this topic over here, and retaliation complaints are often the best pathway for an employee if they ever want to pursue that. And then a lot of times over here, Maurer versus Deloitte, in that case that we talk about in our text, the reality is this is an executive making statements big, bold, brassy statements. And the word is think before you engage your mouth. That's probably the biggest thing to learn. It's a big deal. One time I had a college president, and he was going through the campus and he's saying this and he's saying that. And all of a sudden I'm in human resources and I'm listening to people coming in. Well, he said this and he said this. I says, but it doesn't matter what he says. The contract says this and the contract says this. We're going to follow the contract. I had to have numerous conversations because of the fact that sometimes you need to engage the brain before the lips start moving on the mouth on top of that. And here is the legal case that pretty much says something very similar to that. Take care.